announcement. Also, just to... There we go. Hey, buddy. All right. I guess I should also mention, final paper due the 21st, just as a reminder. Just that's our last day of class, so that's when the paper is going to be due. Excuse me. Also, as often happens in this class, as much as I try to avoid it, but it just ends up happening. There will be no test 3. Test 3 will be the final. It's just how that's going to work. Yeah. That's what often happens, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean anything in terms of like how it's going to be structured or really anything for you guys. It just means you have one less test to study for. It does mean that like the tests and the papers are going to be weighed a little bit differently, but you're still going to have one that you can drop as long as you have done all of them. If you didn't do the first paper, then that's going to be the one that's going to be dropped, and that's it. But yeah, for the most part, it doesn't really affect you guys, but it just means that what we've been studying for up to this point is going to be the final. So that's pretty much that. Any questions in that regard? Or really just at all? Okay, so what that does mean is I don't have to rush. We will have the next 2 weeks to do the rest of this chapter and what's essentially the Roaring Twenties. So we might have like an extra day where I might just decide to briefly go over the Great Depression and World War II just so we can have that in the bag. You will not have to be tested on that. I just like to go over it so you guys can have that knowledge. Because what I would like to do, hold on, let me make sure this is actually recording, because sometimes it likes to not do that. Okay, cool. I would still like to do my movie day idea. Unfortunately for my online students, this only applies to in person, because there's no way I can verify that my online students were there. So for you in-person folks, Tuesday the 22nd is reading day. That means no class. So I will be here from 8:30 to whenever I'm done. And there will be an extra credit opportunity. I will be screening both The Atomic Cafe and Dr. Strangelove, two very seminal, I would say, Cold War era film. Well, The Atomic Cafe is more of a documentary. I'll explain it for those of you that show up for it. It's very good. Dr. Strangelove is a more proper movie. It's very well known. I only recently saw it, and it lives up to the hype. It's very good. Very weird, but I mean, that's Cold War era anxieties and whatnot. Anyway, I'll be starting at 8:30. The first movie will take about as long as a regular class period. Then we'll have a little break, and then I'll start the next one. If you want to come in, it's 2 points per movie. I will have a sign-in sheet. If you watch both movies, it'll be 5 points total towards your final. If you don't want to show up, that's fine. No, it's not going to hurt you. It's just extra credit. If you're not able to show up, I'm sorry, but that's just how I'm going to do it. I consider them fairly important in like understanding the Cold War in terms of like the social aspects of the time. So yeah, that's what's going to be going on. I'll talk more about it, like the 21st when we do our review day, since it would be the next day. But I just wanted to give you guys sort of a heads up. Those of you that will be available that week. Yeah. So that's all I've got. And if nobody has any questions, we will continue on with the rest of this chapter. Okay, cool. All right. So we ended with opening the door with China, which is to say getting involved in the Boxer Rebellion, which was an attempted nationalist uprising to overthrow the Qing Empire because they felt like the government was too weak and bowing to European powers, which, I mean, I wouldn't say was necessarily true, but it certainly wasn't going well for China. And had the Boxer Rebellion succeeded, maybe they would have had a sort of Meiji Restoration style thing happening in China. However, Europeans and Americans were too busy, or rather too invested in exploiting China to let that happen. So they rolled in, put the rebellion down, and then exploited China more. And you wonder why China isn't a big fan of the West. There was also the Russo-Japanese War, which also didn't go well for Russia. I didn't talk about the Baltic Fleet last time because I didn't have time, so I'm going to bring it up here. Because we don't have much, we don't talk about the Russo-Japanese War much in this class, like we do in my European history class. Morning. So, as I mentioned, the Russian fleet was pretty much wiped out in Port Arthur. So they had no Pacific fleet left. It's going to be hard to fight the Japanese with no Pacific fleet. They're getting wiped out on land because it's hard to send troops across Siberia without a railroad. And needless to say, there's no real roads at this time. So they decide to send, I wish I had a map of all of that, but I don't have one on hand. And if I just switched to the internet, it would screw up my stream. So we're just going to have to use our imaginations. So Russia sent its fleet from the Baltic, which is over here in the Atlantic. They decided to send them all the way around to the Pacific. From the start, they almost started a war with the Netherlands and the British by misidentifying both Dutch and British fishing boats as Japanese submarines and shooting at them. They thought that the Japanese had submarines in the North Sea on the other side of the world. Now, the reason that they didn't go to war with either the Netherlands or the British is because none of the shots hit. So not only could they not identify a fishing boat, but they couldn't shoot worth a damn. So they finally got out of the North Sea. Britain would not let them use the Suez Canal because they just did not want these bumbling idiots in their canal. Who knows what would happen. So they had to go all the way around Africa, which caused a number of issues. They were constantly trying to improve their aim, doing various firing exercises. I think at one point, one of the firing exercises went so badly, they killed one of their own chaplains. They shot into one of their own ships and just it hit the chaplain dead on. So he didn't feel any pain, at least. Once they got around Africa, they decided to stop in Madagascar to refuel, and the Russian sailors decided it'd be a great idea to grab a bunch of wildlife and bring it on board, including snakes, crocodiles, and large predatory cats, which immediately broke free and started roaming the ships. So for the next several weeks, the sailors would hide in their bunks while the wild animals prowled the ships. Also, they got all sorts of horrible tropical diseases in Madagascar because, they're Russians and they're not ready for tropical diseases. Eventually, they managed to get to Japan. Also, the Baltic Fleet was split in two. The head of one part of the Baltic Fleet basically wanted to lose the head of the other part of the Baltic Fleet because he was such a incompetent idiot, but he managed to find him, and it almost got to the point that they were willing to shoot each other. It was doomed from the start. Anyway, they finally managed to get to Japan, and off the coast of the island of Tsushima, they met the Japanese fleet and were immediately destroyed. The admiral of the Russian fleet did survive, however, and as maritime law dictates, was saved by the Japanese sailors and was brought on board the flagship. And when he awoke, the Japanese admiral greeted him, and he basically asked, did we do a good job? And the Japanese admiral lied to him and said, yes, you fought honorably. You all fought very well, despite the fact that, they didn't land a single shot. So that was the tragedy of the Balkan Fleet. Like I said, there's an hour-long video about it on YouTube. It is amazing. There's more details to it than I can remember off the top of my head, but it has stuck with me, so I had to share it. Yeah, so between that, Port Arthur, and the Russians getting whipped in Manchuria, Roosevelt's like, yeah, okay, we can't have this because racism, and got the war to end, and then Taft and Wilson and all of this. So, okay, cool. There is the Boxer Rebellion, the carving up of China again, but with chickens this time. More Boxer Rebellion stuff. More of that. There's Japan and Russia fighting. There's the Great White Fleet. And the Roosevelt Corollary. All right. So, once Wilson came to power, he certainly wanted to back off of Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy because, well, he was the opposite party. He wanted to do things differently from Roosevelt. However, he still ended up sending Marines in to protect American investments in Haiti in 1915, the Dominican Republic in 1916, and Cuba in 1917. Which is to say, we sent troops in to protect economic interests, because that's how things went in the early 1900s. Is, hey, our economic interests are being threatened. We're going to send troops in to make sure that these foreign governments do what we say. And that's why Central and South America are in such bad shape today, because we kept overthrowing their governments. However, before all this was the Mexican Revolution in 1911. This is different from the revolution where they overthrew Spain. This was a change of government, which apparently Wilson disapproved of. He withdrew diplomatic recognition after it refused to install leaders he considered good men. So, just to clarify, when a country has a revolution and basically installs a new government or throws out an old government, like throws out a colonial power and becomes a new country, it's not officially a government until an outside force, an outside nation, recognizes them. That's just how foreign relations work. And for America, its like closest neighbor to withdraw diplomatic relations from them, while that's not going to be like, oh, well, because America withdrew diplomatic relations, it's no longer a country, because, any other country could extend diplomatic relations at any time. It's still a pretty, major diplomatic crisis for that to happen. It's not overtly declaring war, but it's pretty close. That's actually a big thing that happened during the Civil War, was the Confederacy was really pushing to try to get either Britain or France to recognize it as a country, so it was no longer just a part of the United States that was in revolution. It was now a separate country fighting a war against the United States. But that never happened. Therefore, the Civil War was just a rebellion, technically, officially. To try and force things, because we've been doing a lot of that, he sent the Navy down to Veracruz on April 22nd, which, of course, led to a clash, because when you send the military down to try to make people do what you want, it's going to lead to violence. The military is not known for just, hanging around and not doing anything. Well, that's not entirely true. I know a lot of ex-military guys. Led to a clash that killed 19 Americans and 126 Mexicans. This led to General Francisco Pancho Villa sending 1,500 troops over the border to attack Columbus, New Mexico. So Wilson responded by sending General John Pershing and 10,000 troops 300 miles into Mexico to capture Villa, which never succeeded. It just caused a whole lot of tensions between America and Mexico, which we will come back to, because if you're looking at the years here, there's other stuff going on in, say, 1914. Over in Europe, they got other things happening. For example, the assassination of the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand caused Europe to gradually slide into what will become the First World War. August 4th, 1914, the Central Powers, Germany, the Ottoman Empire, Austria-Hungary, and also technically Italy at the time, but they're barely a player in the First World War. Declared war on the Allies, technically France and Russia at the time, but then Britain got involved. There's so much technicality to the First World War. But for our purposes, Germany, Ottoman Empire, Austria-Hungary versus Great Britain, France, and Russia. It's not really even the Allies, it was the Entente. This book is so American-centric, it's getting stuff wrong. Now, technically, we were neutral for the first 3 years, but not really. Wilson considered the idea of a British defeat, quote, fatal to our form of government and American ideals. There were peace activists that wanted to remain neutral. Jane Addams and Carrie Chapman Catt, who organized the Women's Peace Party. That said, one of the leaders of the party, God, these names, Lucia True Ames Mead, her middle name was True? Okay. Stated that there can be no peace until the military domination of Germany is destroyed. So she wants America to be neutral, and she doesn't want us involved in the war, but she feels like we 100% need to make sure that Germany is no longer a military power, which was a common mindset of the time. So real quick, this was the American view on the Mexican Revolution, which again, like, uh, as a country that exists due to revolution, it's real weird how we can look down our nose at other countries that are having a revolution to, better themselves. But whatever. And we have Mexican policy. Seems a mess, but maybe plenty of pepper will save it. And pepper, of course, being force here. I also like over here. Note, Mexican dishes must be highly seasoned, which is funny because, Mexican dishes are typically rather spicy. Especially for these Anglo-Americans. You got this image here of Villa running back to Mexico, and this, like, methed out Uncle Sam hopping over the fence with a shotgun. I've had about enough of this. I'm sorry, I don't know why, but there's more Taft as a maid handing off the Villa problem to Wilson. Here we go. The Pershing punitive expedition didn't go well. He just wandered around the Mexican desert for like several years. And, well, Villa never got caught. Although I really like the depiction of Villa here. I mean, obviously he's meant to be like this villain or whatever, but he looks like this amazing Disney villain. Like he's got throwing knives. I guess maybe he walked with a limp because they've got him with a crutch for some reason. But he's got like a sombrero with a rattlesnake around it. Like that is pure Disney villain. It's so good. He would also have like an amazing villain song. Like this is such a good picture. Anyway, here's Wilson steering clear of the rocks, war, intervention, towards justice. It's justice to let London get bombed by Zeppelins. It's fine. They're fine without us. I mean, technically, World War I was much more of a stalemate than World War II. Now, going into 1916, which again we'll get into in just a little bit, Wilson's platform was Wilson kept us out of the war. Vote for Wilson again. So yeah, we have here vote for Wilson who kept you out of the war. And then down here at the bottom it's what's that? U-boat blockading New York? Tut tut, very inopportune. No, there was never U-boats blockading New York Harbor, but that was this belief that like if we didn't help in the war, then Germany would aim for us next. War in Europe, peace in America, God bless Wilson, etc., etc. So here we have the Women's Peace Party. Was that what it was called? Yeah. And as I mentioned to my class yesterday, like you've got one lady here that's having a good time. Everybody else does not look happy to be there. Like she's having a great time. Everybody else is mad. Real patriots keep cool. This is very like World War I lingo. All right. However, it was difficult to maintain neutrality for a number of reasons. For one, we had very close economic ties to the Allies. For example, they purchased $750 million worth of American goods in 1914, which quadrupled over the course of the war, whereas Germany bought $350 million worth of American goods that dropped to about 10% by the time we joined in the war. There was also loans, which Wilson said were, quote, against the spirit of true neutrality, but by 1915 he gave in and allowed for loans. Now, loans in a time of war, like I get, can be seen as just extending the war, especially if you give loans to both sides. Like if you're helping one side of the war, especially when we're like in World War II, before we're officially in the war and we're doing the whole Lend-Lease program with Britain, you're propping up one side to help them. 1915, yeah, so 1917, the Allies had $2.2 billion worth of loans, whereas the Germans were given $27 million. And when it comes to, like, war expenditure, $27 million ain't going to get you a whole lot. I mistakenly said a couple of tanks when I was talking to my class yesterday. They didn't have a whole lot of tanks in World War I. I think the British had a couple of tanks, but they were like, well, we'll talk about the tanks. No, we won't talk about the tanks. This is the wrong class. Damn. The tanks were bad. They were boxes with like treads around them, and you had an equal chance of dying of like diesel fume inhalation as you did of like a bullet coming through the armor and ricocheting around the compartment and killing everybody inside. They weren't what you think of today as a tank, where it's like essentially invulnerable unless you get hit by an explosive. They were not real safe in the slightest. They didn't have any kind of turret or anything. They had like a hole you would stick your gun out of. That was about it. Also, there was the issue in how the British and the Germans conducted warfare, which is to say mostly the sea. Since the British more or less owned the ocean, they had set up a blockade to starve out the Germans because, well, that was how you did things when you had the world's largest naval power. Now, technically, since the United States was a neutral power, they would have been allowed to send non-military goods through the blockade into Germany, so like send food in to keep the civilians from starving. However, the blockade still stopped American ships and like turned them around, which was against like the law of war, but Wilson let it happen. The Germans, having only been able to get their ships out at the Battle of Jutland and were now bottled up in their ports by the blockade, were using U-boats, or the undersea boot, submarines, to try to break the blockade. But this interfered with maritime law because, and I know this sounds weird, but when you roll up on a civilian vessel, you're supposed to tell them, hey, we're about to sink you, get all the civilians off. Because a lot of times they would ship military equipment on civilian vessels, which happened a lot. So rather than being like, hey, we're going to search you, just like, hey, we're going to sink this ship, get all the civilians on lifeboats and get them off. Well, if a submarine did that and like surface and be like, hey, we're going to sink this ship, anybody on board with a decent sized gun could damage and or destroy the submarine. Because submarines were small at this time, like real little. You could fit one in this room, essentially. Like all this class, we would barely fit in a U-boat in terms of crew. Like those things were little. So if they would surface and warn the ship, they were risking destruction. The Lusitania was one such ship. It's the big one that we all remember usually. It was sunk by U-boat on May 15th, killing about 1,200 people, including 128 Americans. Many Americans rallied for military action, including Theodore Roosevelt. But Wilson stuck to his peace policy and managed to narrowly win the 1916 election, but only after demanding the Germans accept strict accountability and pay a settlement to the survivors. I will get a little bit more into the Lusitania in a second, because obviously I've got images that goes into a bit more detail than the book did. So here are the blockades. So you've got this close blockade here over the main German ports, this larger blockade here, and then even like a far blockade in case any were to get out. So basically these were British ships that just had to sort of hang out and patrol the area. Here is what's left of the German fleet after the war, because the Battle of Jutland was actually a draw, which for the British was humiliating, because the British have had the world's greatest navy for, I don't know, when was the Spanish Armada? The 1500s? The last 400 years? And suddenly they go up against this country that's existed for not even 30, 40 years now, and they fight to a draw. You can't have that. The British were pissed. And for the Germans, they were pleased. They're like, okay, well, we didn't win it, but a draw with Britain, that's amazing. So there's a U-boat surfacing. I've got a better image of this size. There's one at dry dock. Now a lot of, it's large size-wise, but most of this is mechanical. As far as crew compartment, very little. And I've got a picture, not on the slideshow, but I've seen a picture of the control panel, and it's a nightmare. It's gears and pulleys, and if you've ever seen clips of the game, was Iron Lung? It looks like that. You're in a thing. You're in a metal coffin under the water, and you have no way of telling where you are. Really, it's a nightmare. Most U-boat crews died of the U-boat failing. There we go. They also had a surface gun for dealing with smaller boats, in case they surfaced and a patrol boat were to find them. There's Lusitania. There's some more at dock. There it is. The Kaiser defies American rights, national honor, freedom of the seas, and international law. We'll get to that in a minute. Also, there were some Irish aboard Lusitania, so we're having propaganda here trying to get the Irish to join, because obviously the Irish didn't want to join because the English were fighting, and the Irish don't want to help the English because they're trying to get their own independence from England. So the English are trying to get the Irish to join and fight. So some more propaganda here. Oh no, the women and children. And the reason I'm saying that, here again, take up sword of justice, Lusitania sunk by submarine, etc., etc. Liberty Bond is a shot at a U-boat. Talk about Liberty Bonds a little bit as well. Here we go. So, I mentioned that a lot of times these passenger ships, these cruise liners, would be carrying small arms and military goods. And the reason that the U-boat sunk the Lusitania was not, as implied here, just oh, these monsters, these animals are sinking passenger liners because they just like killing civilians. No, see all this cargo hold? full of guns, full of ammunition. So what the British liked to do was put a bunch of military equipment in these holds, stick a bunch of civilians on top as human shields, and also oftentimes fly the American flag so it would be seen as like an American ship, so they were less likely to get shot by the Germans, which on the one hand, fair, it's war, but also technically was going against maritime law because you're supposed to like identify your ship when you're on the seas. Yeah. So like, not that I'm saying the civilians that died on the Lusitania knew what was happening. They're innocent victims in all of this. But it's not like the sailors on the U-boat were like, oh yeah, we're going to murder us some civilians today. This was as much a military transport as it was human shields being used by the British to transport their military goods. So, yeah. So, January 22nd, 1917, he, being Wilson, said the world needed a peace without victory. Neither side wanted to end the war that so many had sacrificed themselves for, because this had been an extremely brutal war. We don't go as much into the like trench warfare and machine guns and like no man's land and like gas strikes and just how bad this was as I do in like my European history class. But this war was unlike any we had seen before in terms of its sheer brutality. In 1915 and 16, Germany pledged to not use U-boats to keep U.S. out of the war, but by February of 1917, they had gone back to using unrestricted U-boat warfare, which is to say they would shoot anything that moved, or anything that floated, I guess, because the war was going badly for everybody. Like, there was no clear... Nobody was at a clear advantage in this war. Not really. I mean, Germany had this massive military machine, but they were fighting the French and the British, and on the Eastern Front, the entire Russian Empire, at least for a while. However, February 24th, 1917, the British turned over the Zimmermann telegram. This was from the German Foreign Minister, Arthur Zimmermann. Basically, it made this offer to Mexico that if America joined the Allies, if Mexico joined the Central Powers and the Central Powers won, then Germany would give New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, Mexico, New Mexico, and Arizona to Mexico as like, a prize. This very much pissed off the American people because we had just been almost at war with Mexico for the last several years over the whole Villa Pershing thing. Now, a lot of times, I'm sure in your high school history class, like the Zimmermann note is seen as like the thing that pushed us into the war. It wasn't. There was no single thing that pushed us into the war. The book mentions that in February and March, there were German U-boats that sunk more armed American merchant ships, which is right there. They were merchant ships that had guns, and not just like they were moving guns. They had like cannons. They were able to fight back, but the U-boats the whole point of the U-boat is to not be seen. So Wilson decided to get Congress to declare war. They debated for like 4 days straight, finally approved the war. However, because we wanted to avoid entangling alliances, which was the whole thing that got World War I going, the U.S. technically didn't join the Allies, instead going in with being an associated power. And to explain that to you guys, if there were no entangling alliances, there would have been no World War I. It would have been Austria just like absorbing Serbia because of the assassination. However, due to Austria planning on just like going in and running over Serbia, Russia was going to join in and help Serbia. And since Russia would have crushed Austria, Germany was going to join in and help Austria. And since Germany was really strong and would have potentially crushed Russia, France was going to join in and help Russia. And since Germany knew that France was going to join in, they were going to attack France first so they didn't have to have a fight a two-front war, and we're going to go through Belgium to hit France because Belgium was this buffer zone. But by going through Belgium, they would have violated Belgian neutrality, which caused England to get involved. And that's why World War I happened, basically. Also, technically, England wasn't part of the Allies. They were also sort of an associated power, but that's not important for us. Yeah. Now, as we saw with the Spanish-American War, we didn't have like a huge army ready, so it took us a little while to actually get over there. Initially, we were just like sending the Navy in to help the British fighting German U-boats. Also, the Bolshevik Revolution happened over in Russia, and one of the main things behind the Bolshevik Revolution is we're tired of sending our boys to die, because Russia was not industrialized. In fact, they wouldn't industrialize until freaking World War II, like the middle of World War II. They were losing badly on the Eastern Front, and one of the main topics, or one of the main reasons the Bolshevik Revolution happened was we're going to get out of the war. And once the Tsar was overthrown, the Tsar was overthrown, they pulled out of the war. So Germany was able to pull all of its troops off of the Eastern Front and push west. So there was a 2-month-long battle in the Argonne Forest. Eventually, the Allies broke through and began pushing towards Germany. Germany had exhausted all of its resources and surrendered. This was not like World War II, where there was fighting in the streets in Berlin, where it was like to the last soldier, essentially. This was like, hey, we're out of resources, we're out of money, we're out of everything, we're done. So the armistice was signed on November 11th, 1918, and we'll get into what all that entails in a minute. So I've got this picture here of the Zimmerman telegram, Zimmerman note as it's often called. It's not entirely correct. So we've got Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas for Mexico, the rest of America for myself, perhaps, for Germany. And it says here for Japan, for California, which I don't see as being correct, because this is World War I. And Japan's role in World War I was basically Britain was like, hey, Japan, so we're going to be busy in Europe. If you guys can keep an eye on our colonies, make sure Germany doesn't do anything, because Germany had colonies in the Pacific as well. And also, hey, if you want to take German colonies for yourself, that's cool. So Japan was taking colonies from Germany in the Pacific in World War I. So I don't see that happening. I don't know why that's there. I don't know if this was like made after World War II and they sort of had that in their mind and didn't remember like what the stakes were in World War I or what, but this is incorrect. The rest of this, yeah. So just wanted to clarify there. There's the Zimmerman note exploding in the Kaiser's face, or in his hands, as the thing says. This is great. So you've got the Lusitania sinking, the Kaiser, like, laughing maniacally while also writing the Zimmerman note, and Uncle Sam over here, like, why did they make him look like the Crypt Keeper? Um, like, shaking his fist over the horizon angrily. Like, aha, we have Lusitania, and I'm going to write the Zimmerman note all at the same time. So there's your typical battleships, just in case you didn't know what a battleship looked like. There's our boys. There's the Maxim gun again. Oh, no, this is not again. This is the first time you saw the Maxim gun. These are the Maxim guns of World War I. This whole piece here was interchangeable. It had to be taken off and replaced because after firing it for a while, it would just overheat and like warp. And if you kept firing it, it would explode. So after firing it for probably a chain or two worth of ammo, you would have to just take it off and replace it. Yeah, that was just how that worked. There was no automatic or semi-automatic rifles. Those were all, bolt action. Here we go. The Germans are subhuman brutes, enlist in the U.S. Army, and we've got like this club of culture because, oh no, the German culture is going to get us. That thing that like most of America is now, but don't worry about that. We'll actually get into that in a minute as well. There's no man's land. This is the area between the two trenches on either side that's been bombed out by mortars and is full of mines and machine gun fire, and you don't want to be there. Oh, also, I forgot to mention this to my class yesterday. There's whole big areas of France today where this used to be that like are still too dangerous to go to. There's unexploded ordnance underground. Some of the explosives, like the chemicals from them, have leached into the groundwater, and the water there is still toxic, like 100 years later. And they're called red zones. You don't go there in France. This war, over 100 years ago now, has poisoned parts of France, and you just can't go there. That's how bad this war was. Anyway, there's some water in a trench. I'm sure that's real safe. There's end of the war. Germany accepts armistice. Kaiser, Crown Prince, and Hindenburg seek refuge in Holland. So, like we'll see with World War II, most of what we'll really see with the war is how it went at home. Because other than like the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, we didn't fight a lot of wars physically here in America, and I guess also the War of 1812. Most of what was going on the home front was mobilization. So the progressive government and business practices continued through the Civil War. Wilson created the War Industries Board, supervised the purchase of military supplies. Private businesses could meet demand, which didn't really work until the financier Bernard Baruch took over in March of 1918, which was only a few months before the war ended, but whatever. We mobilized labor with the National War Labor Board, which will show up again in World War II. Settle labor disputes, avoid strikes, attain 8-hour workday, time and a half for overtime work, labor's rights to collective bargaining, unable to achieve equal pay for equal work for women because, even though most of the workforce during the war was women, we can't have equal pay because it's the early 1900s. More than 1 million women took up jobs normally seen as being for men because we were sending men off to die in Europe. Other agencies helped the American war effort by regulating consumption and travel. Herbert Hoover, who we're going to hear a lot of, was made head of the Food Administration. He sought to increase the food supply with voluntary food conservation, children planting vegetable gardens. Hoover felt this was just as real and patriotic an effort as the building of ships or the firing of cannon. Yeah, this was the whole thing, like food conservation so that we could send more stuff to the troops. We also regulated railroads to make sure we could efficiently move troops and supplies. So lots of this, just a lot of this. War industry. Use water wisely because heavy industries use a lot of water to keep the machines cool so they don't, explode. When I was doing security at the GE plant upstate, they were just doing like this very small drilling in these bits to make airplane parts, but they use so much water to make sure that like the friction didn't set stuff on fire. And this is just more Liberty bonds. Help Uncle Sam step out the Kaiser. Yada yada. Don't waste paper. Paper's essential. Pound of paper wasted is a pound of fuel wasted. So a lot of recycling. Help stop this. More, National War Labor bonds or National War bonds. On the job for victory. It's pneumatic like drills or not drills. Rivet guns. Together we can do it. This isn't even World War II. This is like Vietnam, I would notice. Like this, maybe World War II tank, but that is not a World War II plane. That is a jet. We didn't have jets in World War II. Fight or buy bonds. Buy it with thought, cook with care, use less wheat and meat. So, just a lot of this. Where's the, let's see, save a life a week, a lot of that. Food will win the war. We eat because we work. This is the U.S. School Garden Army. And this is what I was preparing you guys for several chapters ago. Follow the Pied Piper. Join the United States School Garden Army. No. I explained to y'all what the Pied Piper story was about. You don't do that. The Pied Piper is a cautionary tale. Or, if you want to look at it in like a modern sense, it's a horror story. If these children are following the Pied Piper with like gardening tools, they're going to become compost. That's horrifying. Again, like I get what they're saying, but whoever made this did not read the story. It's like, oh yeah, follow the Pied Piper. Like, no, you don't do that. You don't ever do that. So, we've been seeing a lot of this. A lot of the anti-war sentiment before the war. And once we finally decided to get in the war, it's not like that all went away. So Wilson created the Committee on Public Information, headed by the Denver journalist George Creel, to create propaganda, inspire patriotic fervor. They encouraged reporters to censor their war coverage, creating film reels to show the Allies as saviors of civilization, Central Powers as savage beasts. We just saw a lot of that already. Now, the censoring of war footage, I need to mention. So, we started doing that because Britain made a goof before we were ever involved. It was called the Battle of the Somme. So, Britain had this great idea where they were going to shell the ever-loving crap out of the German lines at the Somme in France for a week straight. They were just going to hit the German lines with artillery for a week. And while that was happening, they were going to dig a tunnel underneath the no man's land and put like a landmine underneath the German lines. And then once they were done shelling, they were going to set off the landmine, big explosion. And then once that was done, surely all the Germans would be dead. They would go up over the top of their trench, just walk across no man's land like it was a picnic, and take over the trench. So they shelled it for a week. They filmed the whole thing. I mean, they were filming like them bringing in the shells, um, shelling the side, and then the big explosion happened, and they all went over the top. Well, the Germans were more dug in than the British realized, and when you've been getting shelled for a week straight, and the shelling stops, and then there's one big explosion, surely something's about to happen. So the Germans came out of their bunkers, set up their machine guns, and started shooting. And the British got it all on film. And they sent that film back to England. And the British, being the British, were like, oh, no, this is great. We're seeing our boys being heroic. And so they showed it all on the big screen of their boys blasting the Germans with cannon, and then going over the top and being heroic and set to heroic music, and then getting shot. And people passed out in the theaters and were screaming, and it was a nightmare. And so they started censoring their war footage after that. The clips are very much still up on YouTube. They're still out there on the internet. They're not like gruesome. I mean, it is 16 film. You can't really see much, but you are seeing these people going up over the top of like barbed wire, and they're running, and then suddenly they hit the ground. And that was a very fast lesson in that maybe we shouldn't show the public everything that's going on. However, this was not enough. 1917, the Espionage Act was passed, prohibited anti-war activities like interfering with the draft, mailing publication advocating advocating forceful interference with any laws. The Sedition Act was passed the next year. Punish any individuals who express beliefs disloyal or abusive to the American government, flag, or military uniform. You know, who needs the First Amendment, right? If you spoke out against the war, you were sent to jail, like our boy Eugene V. Debs, who was sentenced to 10 years but pardoned after 3 because he was how old? In his late 60s at this point? How old? 68? For saying that the draft was a form of slavery. Because if you are drafted, you go to Europe to die. You don't get a choice. When World War II happened, my grandfather was of age to go to war. But because he was a bad youth, he had already been sent to boot camp, so he was already technically in the military, so he got to choose which branch he went to. And he's like, I'm going to the Navy because I don't want to go to the Army and get shot in a trench. At least I get to be in a warm bunk on the ship. So that was my grandfather's reasoning. The American Protective League was formed during this time of anti-German prejudice, worked with the Bureau of Investigation, which later became the FBI, and had individuals spying on German residents suspected of being spies, which just meant any immigrant bias was official, and any people who spoke their native tongue or partook in foreign customs were seen as not being true Americans and were therefore seen with suspicion, which isn't great, but isn't going to be as bad as we're going to see in World War II, because of course things just get worse. So, U.S. official war pictures. Whoa. Eat more cottage cheese. 1 pound supplies more protein than a pound of beef, pork, lamb, veal. I don't know why veal is separate from beef, but okay. Or fowl. All right. A postal card will bring recipes for using this meat substitute. I don't want to think about cottage cheese as a meat substitute. Ugh. I mean, if y'all like cottage cheese, fine, but I don't. I love this one, though. Gee, I wish I were a man. I'd join the Navy. Now this just says Naval Reserve or Coast Guard. There's this picture's in the book, but rather than that, it says, "Be a man and do it." United States Navy recruiting station. This is extremely funny to me because I used to work with a lot of ex-Navy guys, and well, not just ex-Navy guys, but like I've worked with a lot of like ex-military. And the Navy joke is, how should I put it? I guess the least offensive way to say it is 100 men get on the boat and 50 couples come off. Yeah. Being a man isn't usually how the Navy is seen. Not quite the Air Force, or the Chair Force, as they call them. But yeah, like being a man's man isn't quite what you are seen as in the Navy anymore. So that's very funny that I found that. Strike now, he's fighting for you. Buy Liberty bonds. A bond, by the way, is just like a loan to the government. You buy a bond and you hold on to it for a number of years, and the value sort of goes up a little bit, and then you sell it back to the government and make a little bit of money later on. I pledge allegiance and silence about the war. Resist the draft. Don't register. This is Vietnam, but same idea. Here's the sedition bills: honest opinion, free speech, free press. Yeah, it's weird to think about, like, speaking out against the government gets you disappeared in the night and sent off to, black site prisons, but that would never happen. I have to kind of watch myself anymore. Anyway, also, this is more after World War I, but there was this, like, Red Scare, this concern about, like, communists now that the USSR was a thing. So the sedition legislation was specifically to root out communists, and it just was used to, like, reduce the freedom of the Americans. And they were like, hey, maybe this is a little much. Like, there's maybe 1,000 communists in the entire country. Why does everybody have to suffer for people that aren't really even doing anything? So yeah, 200,000 U.S. secret agents cover nation. This is like during the war. System as planned touches every hamlet. Garrett Marshall is being rounded up with pro-Germans. Notifies the Defense Council disloyalty in Iowa must cease. This one is just like, this kind of goes back to the National War Labor Board. Agitation which delays our war industries is, quote, made in Germany, basically where we're trying to avoid labor strikes because any delay in war production is helping the enemy, which I get. That's why the National War Labor Board was making sure that that any concerns by the unions was actually being heard by the corporations rather than being ignored, so that the strikes had to happen to actually make something go on. So, meet in the middle. This I just tossed in because the art was very World War I / World War II, like the Germans are subhuman monsters that eat babies, because there was like a demo man soldier thing and people made propaganda, so that this just fit perfectly. Anyway. All right, we're almost done. So, in January of 1918, before the war was over, Wilson presented Congress his idea of a peace without rancor, which is to say without, like, lasting anger, I guess. This was to prevent future conflicts, was based on his 14 points. Freedom of the seas, open diplomacy, which is to say no more secret treaties, which is what caused a lot of these issues. free trade, self-determination of colonial subjects, reduction in military spending, et cetera, et cetera. Most importantly was the League of Nations, which is a like proto-United Nations. Countries could band together for peaceful resolution, and if necessary, work together to use military force to stop, say, a bigger country from invading a smaller country. After the armistice, he went to the Paris Peace Conference to push his idea for peace. The crowds were very enthusiastic because it was the first time an American president had actually gone overseas while being the president. He was less enthusiastically greeted in the Congress itself, or the conference itself. He fought for 6 months to get his ideas pushed through. The Allies wanted to make the Central Powers pay for the war. None of the Imperial Powers wanted to let their colonial powers have any of their freedom back, because they treated them like we treated ours, where it's like, oh, they're children and they can't govern themselves. So that was how that worked. And obviously Britain didn't want to have their naval superiority challenged with the whole freedom of the seas thing. French President Georges Clemenceau described it as, President Wilson and his 14 points bore me. Even God Almighty has only 10, which, rude. He had to make a number of compromises, such as the war guilt clause, where Germany had to accept that they were the ones that caused the war, which isn't entirely true, but, you know, whatever. The League was eventually agreed upon. So here's the 14 points if you actually wanted to see them. A lot of these are like changes in territory, which totally won't cause any problems. But the main thing here is this League of Nations at the end. That's the important bit. Germans asked for peace. Wilson's 14 points. Wilson as the man of the hour, et cetera, et cetera. There was this issue, though, that the League didn't have much fight behind it, which I'll get into here real quick before we finish. League of Nations was idealism. And then he returned home, and it was even harder. He couldn't even get the Senate to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, the treaty that ended the freaking war. Republicans held the majority in the Senate. Wilson needed a 2/3 majority for ratification. Henry Cabot Lodge, who was the Republican who headed the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, opposed Article 10 of the League of Nations, which had the whole collective military aggression thing, where, like, you know, if there's a nation invading another nation, that the League of Nations would step in to stop it from happening. Which, like, I get. Like, we don't want to have to send our military all over the world all the time to stop stuff from happening if it's not our business. So Wilson's like, okay, fine. We'll back off on that. And then Wilson added 14 more reservations before he would allow for ratification. So Wilson's like, no, you know what? If we keep cutting this up, it's not going to be the same treaty that I signed in Europe. And we signed this in good faith. And if we cut this treaty up, then how are the Europeans going to trust America? Can you imagine European countries not trusting America to keep their word? It'd be crazy. Wilson also faced irreconcilables who opposed the League altogether because they didn't want to hang alliances, which, again, I get. But at the same time, like, isolationism doesn't work. Which, who boy we're going to see. So Wilson went out to rally public opinion, went around the nation on a speaking tour. Over the course of 3 weeks, he traveled 8,000 miles by train, kept up a grueling schedule. After a stop in Pueblo, Colorado, he collapsed and canceled his trip. October 2nd, he suffered a stroke that nearly killed him, left him partially paralyzed, emotionally unstable, and mentally impaired. His wife, Edith, ran the White House for the rest of his time in office. So the League of Nations literally almost killed Wilson, in short. And it wasn't ratified. the United States never actually joined the League of Nations, and this is the perfect image of that. The League of Nations bridge designed by the President of the USA, and here we have the stones in the bridge. And the keystone, the one that should be there to hold it together, never actually joined. So needless to say, the League did not last. So you have Wilson going out to the American people. The draft of the League of Nations with Wilson's very unhappy face. Some of these images are great. Yeah, U.S. Senate coming in like the Kool-Aid Man. There's the peace treaty after Lodge got a hold of it. Speaking of Lodge, a good visual gag there. The Cabot Lodge with the peace treaty hung up on the side of it. All right, and yeah, so we became an imperial power. McKinley and Roosevelt followed Mahan's plan, enlarged the Navy, built a canal. We ignored, these freedom fighters because we felt like they were unfit to govern themselves. Created cooperation between government and corporations. First World War was this major crisis, and the failure of the League of Nations shattered Wilson's idealism. But, as we're going to see, we were this major power at the end of World War I. We were in great financial shape. We're the world's leading creditor, and we had a major expansion in our industrial capacity. But being unwilling to work with other nations to stop expansionism is going to be an issue in about 20 years or so. So yeah, that's that for Chapter 20. We will get into essentially the Roaring Twenties next week. So I'll see y'all on Monday.